What is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are hopping into quarterbacks to target for the 2022 fantasy football playoffs. These are quarterbacks who have favorable matchups overall between weeks 15 and 17 that you are going to want to keep in mind to potentially stash for the most part as we approach the playoffs. Don't get me wrong, guys, it's pretty black and white when it comes to the quarterback position. It's pretty straightforward. You're probably going to be starting whoever your starting quarterback is, but really a lot of the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks throughout the fantasy playoffs have difficult matchups at the end of the day. So I wanted to provide you guys with some potential streaming options or 1 or 2 quarterbacks to potentially target in trades before we get too close to the playoffs and before the trade deadline is over. So I'm not saying go out and start some of these quarterbacks over Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes, but like I said, when you look at some of these top quarterbacks moving into the final weeks of the season and the fantasy championship, there are quarterbacks who are playing very good right now in the top 5, top 6, top 7 who have difficult matchups weeks 15 through 17. So without further ado, let's hop into today's video. Let's take a look at some quarterbacks to target for the playoffs here in 2022. All right, first on the list, we've got Lamar Jackson, a quarterback who hasn't been playing as great in the past couple weeks at the time I'm recording this. And just as a side note, before we move in to every quarterback, I am recording this going into week 10 of the season. So depending on when you are watching this video, some of these defenses may improve overall against the positions. Things can change, so just keep that in mind while we are going through today's quarterbacks. But at the moment, Lamar Jackson, as we get close to the trade deadline, is definitely a quarterback who I've seen thrown around for a lot of you guys in trade questions. He gets the Cleveland Browns in week 15, who played pretty well overall against the quarterback position, but this is going to be a competitive game script as a whole. We could potentially have the Browns fighting for a wild card spot in the playoffs, but more importantly, we could definitely have important seedings for the Baltimore Ravens at the end of the season here in week 15. So even if the Browns have played well against quarterback position, this is still a good game script for Lamar Jackson. Let's move past week 15 though. Week 16, he gets the Atlanta Falcons, the 5th best team for the quarterback position to go up against from a fantasy football perspective. And in week 17, he gets the Pittsburgh Steelers, the 4th best team for a quarterback to go up against from a fantasy perspective. We all know what Lamar Jackson is capable of. We all know the ceiling he brings from a fantasy football perspective. So I absolutely think he's a quarterback you should target as we approach the 2022 fantasy football playoffs. And next up, we've got Aaron Rodgers. Like I said, guys, these aren't going to be top tier quarterbacks as we move throughout today's list. So Aaron Rodgers, not been playing great football. His ceiling on the season has been awful. Week 15, it's not a great matchup against the Rams. They are in the top 10 against the quarterback position from a fantasy perspective. But let's just take a look at week 16 and 17. He gets the Miami Dolphins, the best team in the league for opposing quarterbacks. And in week 17, he gets the Minnesota Vikings, the 9th best team for opposing quarterbacks. So overall, you got to imagine at the moment with how poorly this season is going for Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers, at the end of the season, they are going to have to make some sort of push, even if it's just to gain some respect on the season as a whole. So I would imagine if the season continues to go how it's going, Aaron Rodgers is going to play as competitive as possible at the end of the season. So he's got 2 really good matchups. This is a quarterback you can go out and get on the waiver wire. You don't have to do it this week. You don't have to do it next week. Depending on when you're watching this, you might be able to do it in week 15 or week 16 and just use them through the fantasy playoffs. Especially, I mean, I've seen a lot of rosters out there with quarterbacks like Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Geno Smith as your starting quarterbacks. You may need a little bit of upside going into the playoffs. Don't get me wrong, Justin Fields brings a lot of upside, but he's got some difficult matchups overall in the fantasy playoffs. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But overall, Aaron Rodgers, definitely a quarterback you can take a look at for the upcoming playoffs. All right, next up we got Russell Wilson. I can't believe I'm saying it, but hey, we just talked about Aaron Rodgers. Let's talk about Russell Wilson, who's also struggling at this point in the season. But honestly, when you look at the overall strength of schedule for the Broncos on the season, he has faced a lot of teams who have played very well against the quarterback position. Now, I'm not defending Russell Wilson or his play this year or how bad the play calling overall for this offense has been, but I do think he could put together a couple nice stat lines throughout the fantasy playoffs. We want to avoid week 16 against the Rams, but in week 15 against the Arizona Cardinals, the 7th best team to face from the quarterback position. In week 17, he gets the Kansas City Chiefs, the 8th best team to face from a fantasy football perspective from the quarterback position. So all I'm saying, similar to Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson is a quarterback who's getting dropped in a lot of leagues. He is a quarterback you can easily roster and hold on to and just use matchup based throughout the fantasy playoffs. Take a look. He might have a couple nice games coming up as we approach the playoffs. All right, next up, we got Jimmy GQ himself. He'll face the Seattle Seahawks in week 15, the 11th best team to go up against. Week 16, he gets the Washington Commanders, the 13th best team to go up against. And in week 17, he gets the Las Vegas Raiders, the 2nd best team to go up again. So we know so far on the season with Jimmy Garoppolo as a starter, he's not bringing a good ceiling from the position, but what we do know is he brings a really safe floor, somewhere between 16 and 19 fantasy points. So I do think with these favorable matchups overall, if you're struggling at the position later on in the season, Jimmy Garoppolo is absolutely a quarterback you can take a look at. But keep in mind, last year he had one of the most favorable playoff schedules overall and really didn't do much of anything at all. But if you are desperate for a streaming option throughout the playoff schedule, go ahead and jot down on your notes, Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be a quarterback you can take a look at throughout the playoffs. All right, I told you guys there's going to be streaming options on here. There's going to be options that might surprise you. There's going to be options that you're not going to want to start over studly quarterbacks, even in tough matchups. But similar to Garoppolo, we want to go ahead and jot down that Zach Wilson has an extremely favorable playoff schedule. In week 15, he'll face the Detroit Lions, the 3rd best team to go up against from the quarterback position. In week 16, he gets the Jacksonville Jaguars, the 12th best team. And in week 17, he gets the Seattle Seahawks, the 11th best team. So overall, a very favorable schedule. But the other aspect here is all 3 of these teams are awful, and I mean awful, against the running back position. We talked about this strength of schedule for Michael Carter and James Robinson in the running back segment of this series. So I also am of the belief that there's a very strong possibility that the Jets are going to run the football a lot in these games, which will ultimately cap Zach Wilson's overall ceiling. But he's worth a shot if you get desperate enough. I mean, we're talking worst case scenario here. Zach Wilson, based on strength of schedule, someone you can stream if things get ugly in the 2022 fantasy football playoffs. All right, last up, I want to talk about Justin Fields, a quarterback who, if you own, you absolutely should not drop. A quarterback who, if you are in a good position leading up to the playoffs, you should consider trading for, because he gets the Detroit Lions in week 17, the fantasy championship week for about 95% of you guys. This matchup is absolutely beautiful. He should absolutely shred the Detroit Lions. And let's face it, the Bears could be fighting realistically for a playoff position, a wild card spot in week 17. This could be a favorable game script as well. And even if the Bears aren't fighting for a last minute wild card spot, we know that these divisional games at the end of the year always stay competitive, right? So I like the game script regardless, but we do want to note, right, weeks 15 and 16 are very tough for Justin Fields. He gets the Philadelphia Eagles and the Buffalo Bills, 2 of the best teams in the league from a fantasy perspective against the quarterback position. So just keep that in mind. If you own Fields, you may want to take a look at another quarterback for weeks 15 and 16. And if you do trade for him, don't give up too much value at the quarterback position, because you're probably going to need someone through the first 2 weeks of the playoffs. But also keep in mind, he played very well against the Dallas Cowboys, who are also one of the best teams in the league against the quarterback position. So there's no telling what he'll be able to do against the Eagles and the Bills. But ultimately, we want Justin Fields on our rosters for that Week 17 matchup in the Fantasy Championship. He's going to absolutely light it up. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today, be sure to hit that like button on the way out. Hit that subscribe button. Of course, if you're new to the channel, it really does help us out. You guys hit that like and consider subscribing. And please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can, regardless of what week you guys are watching this, whether it's week 10 or week 16. Let me know what you guys need. I'll get back to you when I can. And keep in mind, guys, I'm recording this going into week 10 of the 2022 fantasy football season. So a lot can change in terms of injuries, in terms of some of these defenses, maybe stepping it up as we get closer to the fantasy championship. So just keep in mind, depending on when you're watching this, there could be some differences overall in what you're seeing in today's video. But with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.